I think there's so many obstacles and or barriers from your culture, the kind of community you grew up in, to your religion, all the way through to whether you drink alcohol or not, your kind of interests and community. And I think that the list is long, but I think the key implication of it is that in hiding that and or not being able to feel like others can relate to your story makes you feel small and or invisible. And I think it's the compound effect of feeling like you're somewhere you don't belong, where you're not seen or can't be seen fully, slowly erodes your confidence, your belief that you're meant to be there and you're valued for who you are. And so the biggest obstacle, if I had to capture it in a single word, it would be confidence. Because to be a leader, to be a senior leader in an organization, you have to have confidence. You have to be able to believe you're there for a reason. You have to be able to make bold decisions. You have to be able to value and express your view and opinion, whether or not people want to hear it. There are so many kind of things that are key, but all hook on that ability to have confidence and self-belief that is eroded for so many people of different races and ethnicities.
So the main challenge for ethnically diverse individuals, in my view, is the fear of being excluded. And that fear does take away a lot of energy from people. That energy that could actually be fed into the business and ideas and innovation. So I would suggest for people to divert their energy into the more positive areas.
I heard someone else answer this question and I found it very interesting. They said that the decision makers, who are often the majority, may not have seen many ethnically diverse people in leadership positions. So that makes it difficult, number one. And the decision makers can often not see themselves in that person. So that makes it difficult for them too. And so when they think about, can I imagine this individual who comes from a different background to myself, potentially in a leadership position, they just can't imagine it. And they are almost discounted before even given a chance. And what happens is, as a result of that, it's a lot of pressure on the individual who wants to progress in an organization. And it's almost like you have to prove yourself more than many others in order to get that opportunity, rather than having the potential that often other people see in others. So it's a really frustrating situation to find yourself in.
I think we can break it down into maybe three parts. One is getting people employed in our industry, and then sort of the mid-career, and then finally the very senior roles. And I think the question is the biggest obstacle, and I think the biggest obstacle is the bias that people have, and it's unconscious bias. I don't think it's a sort of an explicit decision by any leaders out there in the industry to limit, say, the hiring or promotion to the group that is, say, predominantly male and white or whatever that might be. But it just happens naturally because of what the pool of assets they're dealing with. And so if we think about employing and getting young guys to join in the industry, here, again, because of the history and because of how the industry is set up, the people tend to deviate to what they know best. And so has been historically a range of, you can, name them, with your fingers, the, schools that people are hired from, universities that people are hired from. And so you end up with a pool of people that look exactly like people that are hiring them. And that's been an issue. And I think over the years, this has been tackled, and it's being tackled. And we see a lot more recruitment that is a lot wider. And we see a lot more young guys that are coming in from various backgrounds. And that's already sort of a much better comparing, say, to 20 years ago when I was starting out. And then once you're in and you're somewhat different, then the bias doesn't stop, right? Because you're hired. And so from my personal experience, I guess we call it embrace. Obviously, I'm white. So this is already very helpful that I look similar to everybody else. But still, you walk in and sort of the instant I guess the biases that people have, she walks in, she's a female, which is a thing. She's blonde, which is, funny, but it's a thing. And she speaks with an accent. And I think this is hugely important, that we think about sort of not just ethnically, people looking different, but people coming from different cultures, and people not having English as their first language. People have, different mannerisms, the way they speak, the way they present themselves. And instantly, obviously, the bias would be, it's something not familiar. And it's I guess you can't blame them. It's harder to then command respect and the same amount of attention to whatever it is you're saying. Specifically for us, that we're not in a business of making things that you can then show, this is what I've made, I'm selling this to you. We're in the business of selling, our opinions and our advice. And so the trust and this connection on this level is what takes it to make in this industry. And if you start out with a sort of suspicion from the other side that maybe you look different, maybe your color is different, your accent is different, whatever it is you say, you have to make it so much more impactful, and you have to make sure that your content is so much more on the ball, because the form is not there. And so it takes a lot of confidence that we're lacking, because we're just not on the same page in the starting place. So this, I would say, is when you start out and in your midway sort of career, this is what you're sort of fighting along the way. And then once I think you've reached the more senior levels. Hopefully by that point, you've been established and you command respect, and everybody knows you for who you are and what you are professionally, and sort of the bias slightly fades away. But I think this beginning and the midway is the hardest bit to tackle.
I think the biggest obstacle is self, if I'm honest. I got to be careful here. It doesn't mean that unconscious bias doesn't exist. It absolutely does exist, but it's often the difference between success and less success is in how one deals with it, carries themselves, calls it out when it needs to be called out, but then otherwise just pick oneself up and wade through the environment that they're operating in. It creates resiliency, and it certainly creates success if one is willing and able to stomach it and just get moving.
The biggest obstacle to people from ethnically diverse background securing senior role is communication. Sure, effective communication skill is important for everyone, regardless of whether you are from ethnically diverse background or not. But I do believe communication is even more challenging for people like me who are immigrant. English is not as a native language and come from different culture. For instance, the way we think and process is a little different. And being able to elaborate and persuade others are critical skills in senior role. But those don't come naturally for many people from ethnically diverse background, perhaps due to the language skill as well as cultural differences. For instance, in some culture, constant debates can be seen as too aggressive or disruptive. So some culture like Japan tend to avoid conflict. Even when we address some conflict, the way we address tend to be softer and might not come across as explicit enough, so that might result in some misunderstanding, hence less effective communication. I know I'm generalizing things here, but I think communication challenge with people from ethnically diverse background is a huge topic and a key challenge.
I think the one thing that boards and senior executives can do to truly drive true meritocracy and change is to continually question. And it's not just question the data, question the pay gap data or question diversity data. It's actually question that an outcome has actually been achieved. it's really the responsibility of senior execs and for the board to make sure they're really clear on the aims and the objectives that they want their firms to have in terms of inclusivity. And then to make sure that they've defined what those outcomes are from the beginning. Because you can't have change when it's just a headline or it's just a rating or a target. It's how are you going to do it and how are you going to make sure it happens. And that's how we change. And that's how we drive meritocracy.
So I joined the industry because I really believed it was a meritocracy. And I think, as I've said before, I've not experienced any overt discrimination. But that doesn't mean that I haven't faced or been affected by discrimination, because I think it's implicit in human beings. We're shaped by our life experiences. The three things that my senior leaders and executives did that really, for me, transformed my career and was the foundation of it, firstly, was sponsorship. So I had people who took me under their wing, who saw potential in me that I didn't see in myself, and who helped me rewrite that negative self-talk that I had. So that's by far the first and most important. The second was radical candor. They cared enough, and people around me cared enough to tell me, you're being too ambitious, you're not taking others along with you for the journey, you're being too pushy, or you need to listen more, or need to have more empathy. There are so many things, and I know exactly who said it, and it stayed with me, and I worked on those things, without which I couldn't have progressed in my career. And the final thing is, actually, I had the chance at multiple points in my career to have external coaching, because I think it's one thing hearing that feedback, but when it's deep-rooted, either handed down through generations or even rooted in generational trauma, you don't just change it overnight. So having executive coaching was really kind of instrumental in me being able to examine some of those kind of negative habits or behaviors or things that were getting in the way of progress, and develop those. So I think those are three things: sponsorship, kind of honest, radical feedback rather than just being polite, which is all too common, especially in Britain. And third, actually giving executive coaching to someone who you want to see progress.
So I think driving meritocracy across the finance industry is a multi-pronged approach, and we need to look at lots of different things, starting off with how we drive broader recruitment, how we retain people at different stages of their career, how we think about the appraisal process to make sure that it's fit for purpose, how do we ensure that we disseminate information and job availabilities to all sorts of people, how do we offer networking opportunities, how do we ensure we've got good role models that are applicable and representative to most people? And how do we offer mentoring and coaching opportunities that are suitable for most of the workforce?
So what's important is that you are clear on the competencies, expectations from a performance and a behavioural perspective, and measure employees against those. Have a diverse committee with robust guidelines around promotion. Moderation panels, if organised well, can work really well. Confront biases and judgments that might exist within yourselves, within the panel. And rather than making assumptions about individuals, ask the line manager, or better still, ask the individual. Sometimes, for example, if we think about mothers, they might say, oh, but she's got kids, so let's not put her on this deal, or let's not promote her because she's going to find it very difficult. That's a judgment, that's a bias that's completely incorrect, potentially. So best to ask questions. Finally, think about contextualizing. I find that very useful as a leader. Looking at the whole person is incredibly important, and looking at all of the diversity dimensions and how they intersect is also important.
So future leaders who feel that they've gone above and beyond and are still struggling to progress, I think the three tips I would give them is to take a step back and really take a long, hard think about whether they really have gone above and beyond. and in what way. So what skills do they need to demonstrate and hold in order to be able to progress, and have they evidenced those specific skills? I would suggest open and honest conversations with the layer above them to really talk through what is it that is stopping them from progressing. Is it things that are within the individual's control, or actually there are just limitations in terms of scope for growth or timeline? And then the third thing I would say is leverage your networks, whether those are internal or external. Talk through what you're trying to achieve, the timeline you're working to, and look at what options are available. At some point, the options may well be external, but it may be that you need to adjust your expectations.
I think it's important to decide when it's time to move on. There are certain organizations you're never going to succeed in, and it's important to be realistic and honest about that. And particularly when you've invested a lot in that organization in trying to be successful, that's a tough call to make. I think the second piece of advice I give is to seek help. Don't feel you have to do this on your own.
There are so many people that find themselves in this position. Ask questions of your manager or head of department, and if you're not satisfied with the answers, ask again. And if you remain unsatisfied with those answers, I think it's really important to reflect, and if you feel ignored, it's time to look for another job. Just do it. What's the worst that can happen? As a lady I admire called Madeleine McQueen, she said in a session that she ran at my organisation, and she said, we are not trees, we are not bound, our roots are not bound to one place. So we have an option and we can make decisions and choices. And also we should really self-reflect and acknowledge, as well as consider and confront our own self-limiting beliefs of ourselves or thinking. And part of that, if you're from an ethnically diverse background, could be due to social, cultural conditioning that we carry with us throughout our lives, really. And, you know, for example, I grew up being told not to rock the boat, to stay quiet, and be very grateful for the job I have. So it's really important that you self-reflect too.
I don't know if the when is enough question is necessarily applies to me, right? Because back to the point of resiliency and picking oneself up and taking ownership for outcomes, I don't see the environment around me as owning me or controlling me or stopping me in my tracks. I see the environment as a necessary thing that and the way in which I interact with it dictates both short-term outcomes, but also long-term wisdom, perhaps. And so my advice is to make sure that one knows what their motivations are, that they're grounded in with clarity in who they are, and the motivations are what they want to accomplish, and that they carry themselves the way that that is consistent with how they see themselves. So it's all about, I think, alignment of the who, the why, and the how, and that those things need to be consistent with who one is. Every year, I have an opportunity to think about whether that emotional contract I have with the company is fit for purpose and it's valid for the next year, right? The next 365 days. And 24 times I've had the opportunity to ask that question of myself and to recommit. And the reason, by the way, is that I've continued to learn. I've been fortunate enough to have been mobile, right, personally, but the company's been willing to move me around. I've reconnected with my background and culture, so the company moved me to the Middle East. I was responsible for the Middle East for a while. I had been in New York previously. I then moved to London, and 25 years, but 11 different roles. And so constant learning and development opportunities. And that's what, right, the alignment with my own search for, for my own curiosity, intellectual curiosity, aligned really nicely with what the company was willing to do and looking to do, and that's why I've been here for 25 years, because I've kept saying to myself in answering the question, would you stay? Why would you stay? And the answer to the question has always been yes, because I continue to learn, develop, and mature.
First of all, be truly honest with yourself. Be truly honest. Have you done everything you feel you can do in terms of your talent, your ability, and your development? So that's point one. Second, really ask that same question of a senior leader inside your organization. Ask them, what do they feel you need to do in terms of development, in terms of your progression as a future leader? And actually, the third thing to do is, once you've done 1 and 2, step back and think, have I really done all of that? And if I have, and the answer is still, I'm not progressing, it's time to move on. Move on, find another organization, because then it isn't about you, it is the organization.
So something that I believe really strongly is that when you're hiring someone, especially into a senior role, it's actually a risk management exercise. You're having to make sure you're making the right decision. You have to protect your own neck in terms of the decision you're making, but also that person then you're going to give authority, autonomy to make decisions, and you need to make sure they don't let you down. And so thinking about it as risk management, I've always found really valuable. How do you make the person whose job it is to decide, how do you make it easier for them to make that decision? How do you de-risk the decision for them? And so for me, it's really about showing that you're already doing the role, showing that you're capable of doing the role, demonstrating the very traits and skills and competencies that someone is looking for in those roles goes way over and above, in being able to actually secure those roles. And I think that's something that not a lot of people recognize. You're often looking at it from your own perspective, and your own frustration and sometimes desperation gets in the way of actually someone being able to see a calm, assured, confident leader who is able to make mistakes, who is able to be vulnerable, who is able to ask for help, who is able to lead from the front and make clear, bold, confident decisions.
I would suggest that you find the courage to have the conversation about any cultural stereotypes that might be reflected onto you. Open up the conversation with curiosity and humility and start with, I noticed X during Y, and I would like to have a conversation about how that impacted me and might impact others. To me, that's really important because you're coming from a really curious place. And to be honest with you, how can someone not answer you if you were to ask a question like that? Why is it important? It's important for you, but it's also important for others as well, because if that results in a bit of a shift in mindset and perspective, mission accomplished for that day, for that incident.
My top tip to future leaders to challenge cultural stereotypes is to encourage their employees to fit together, not fit in. They should want their employees to have the confidence to be themselves in the workplace to get the best out of them.
The main thing is to be aware that this stuff exists, that biases exist, and it's not very obvious to maybe someone that's not faced some biases personally, or I don't want to use the word discrimination, but some sort of, a judgment of sorts. So it might be obvious that it's out there and it's very, very widespread. So I think the best future leaders can do and organizations can do for their future leaders is educate them and broaden their minds, or open their minds, open their horizons. And so if on a personal level, how travel opens up your mind and your understanding of other people and other cultures. This is massive. Not everybody is well traveled and sort of well aware of what's out in the world, but within organizational context, I think it's definitely the education and engagement with leaders to explain that this exists, with examples and helpful trainings, and hopefully this will help to break down the barriers from the leadership point of view when they sort of look at their talent pools and how they evaluate people, how they judge people, and how they promote people. And the other thing I would say, it's obviously the industry is very Anglo-Saxon. It's very male, and it comes with certain cultural, the starting points that they have. And obviously for us individually, we think whatever we believe in and however we behave is the norm, because this is how we grew up and this is what we see around us, which might not be the case for somebody who's coming from a different part of the world. And it's very, very hard to mentally put yourself outside of your box and say, well, maybe the other behavior is completely normal and mine is not. And it's just a hard thing to do. And I think the only way to break this is by education and engagement, and sort of explaining that it's out there.
A top tip that I would give is really around being open and educating others around them. We all have a sphere of influence. We all have peers that work with us, and I would really suggest everyone to start the conversation, have an open space, and educate others in terms of what ethnicity means for them.